Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on Microsoft Fabric and the Data Factory workload. My name is Miguel Escobar. I'm one of the presenters that you will be hearing in this session. I'm a product manager for Microsoft. I work with the Data Factory team, specifically with the team that works on Data Flows Gen 2. I was previously a Microsoft MVP before joining Microsoft a little bit over a year ago. And I also have a book on Power Query or data flows that is called Master Your Data with Power BI and Power Query. I'm also an Azure certified data architect. With me, you're going to have Abhishek, who's a product manager in the Data Factory team. He leads the efforts on data pipelines and data integration security. He was also a Microsoft MVP before joining Microsoft. And he has also co-authored a book by the name of Personalizing Big Data and Advanced Analytic Solutions. He's also an Azure certified solution architect. Data Factory is the offering that offers you data integration solutions. Whether you are a citizen data integrator or a professional data integrator, we have something to offer you, where you will be able to transform the data with intelligent transformations and leverage a rich set of activities. Within Data Factory, we have what we call two artifacts or two components that you can leverage. One of them is called data pipelines, which can help you orchestrate your data transformation. It can allow you to create some really sophisticated control flow pipelines and allows you to move petabyte-sized data. For Data Flows Gen 2, it's a low-code to no-code data preparation experience. It has over 300 data transformations. And in comparison to its predecessor, to Data Flows Gen 1, it now has an output destination feature that allows you to define where you can load the transformations or the output that you have for your data flow. This session is going to be divided into two sections. The first one, we're going to focus solely on the value that brings data pipelines, which is going to be led by Abhishek. And in the second section, we're going to go through that same experience, but with Data Flows Gen 2 and what Data Flows Gen 2 has to offer.
Hello everyone. Today in this session we're going to talk about Fabric Data Factory, and we're going to specifically talk about data pipelines in Fabric. Data pipelines are evolution of Azure Data Factory pipelines, as you may already know. It's low-code data orchestration tool. It supports fast copy via the copy activity, where you can copy petabytes of data at scale into the lakehouse, into one lake in Microsoft Fabric. It supports rich library of orchestration activities, and it also adds a few new activities, which we'll talk about in this session. Copy Assistant helps you easily get started, and it supports rich monitoring at the platform level. With this, let's get to the agenda of this session. So in this session, we will focus on 8 new interesting capabilities in Fabric data pipelines. And these 8 are basically nominated by me. Of course, there are plenty of others as well that we can talk about, but I just wanted to restrict because we just have 20 more minutes to go. So I wanted to restrict it to 8 interesting capabilities in Fabric data pipelines that may interest you. So we'll start off with easy to get started, which makes it super easy for new users as well as existing Data Factory users to get started with. Things like Fabric free trial, which means earlier in the Azure world, you had to sign up with a free Azure subscription trial. It required you to have a credit card, and many times we heard from customers that was quite a pain point to get started with data pipelines, and many couldn't even get to there, or it took quite a long time to get subscriptions from your IT teams so that you can get started with it. So that has been simplified. Then the sample data sets, we'll talk about that. So with this, let's move on. Let's talk about the free trial. So free trial is extremely easy to enable in Fabric, which means if you have an official account for Power BI, you can very easily go ahead and upgrade to a start, or you can start a trial, and via by starting a trial, you'll be able to see Data Factory in your Microsoft Fabric, and you'll be able to create data pipelines. So it's super easy to get started, especially if you've been working with Microsoft Power BI before. It's completely SaaSified, so it's a SaaS foundation, and hence you would find things which it is quite easy to get started with. Now, sample data sets. That's again a new thing which we didn't have in Data Factory in Azure or in Synapse. And it allows you to easily get started by choosing any one of these sample data sets that we have, and we'll continue to add more and more sample data sets to this, which means you can easily try out data pipelines, the performance, the capabilities via the different activities that supports these data sets. Now, it gives you freedom to play with it, as at the same time, you don't have to bring in any credentials, which means you don't have to ask your IT team for sharing credentials. You don't have to worry about your credentials being leaked out or your credentials being used by any other user. So in case of ADF, as you know, that all the credentials are kind of shared with all the different users in the same data factory. That is not the case, and especially with things like sample data sets, these are connections which isn't holding any enterprise critical data. These are all sample data sources created by Microsoft, and hence it's safe to use them, and it makes it easy to get started, especially with anyone who is new to the platform, and if they're trying out the data pipeline capabilities. Now, another important thing, especially when making it easier to get started, was and this was missing in Data Factory in Azure and Synapse, was the user auth. It is actually better in case if you're using user auth because it prevents privileged accesses in case each user has their own specific access permissions to different data sources, and they would only end up using their specific permissions to access the data in that data source, which is not the case when you're using managed identities and service principals, though they have different advantages, especially with CI/CD. So the point is not to say this or that, but it's more importantly to say that especially when you're getting things started with, it is important, and especially when you're dealing with a lot of users who are not professional data engineers, it is always easier, and especially with the scale of hundreds and thousands of business analysts and data engineers, it is always easier to support user authentication and give them lower privileged access, or the access that they actually require, using security groups rather than having to create a single larger managed identity which has overprivileged access. So pros and cons of both approaches, but user auth was certainly missing. Service principal is something which we've already added in the platform in Microsoft Fabric. Managed identity will be coming soon, and now you have user auth as well, which kind of makes getting started super easy. Now, there were a lot of concepts in ADF which we heard from customers that people do need time to, especially to get started with, and it takes time for learning. There's an upward learning curve where users have to understand the different relationship and the concepts around the data sets in Azure Data Factory and Synapse, and how does integration runtime relate to that, and the link services and activity and pipelines. And there were so many different concepts, and each one of them had a dependency on each other. Sometimes those dependencies caused failures in the pipeline executions and so on. So what we did in Fabric is we made sure that while we support parameterization, we do want to make sure that we simplify the concepts, like data sets pretty much can be inline as well. So we added inline data sets here. You can specify the lakehouse or the database or the table information in the activity payload itself. Now, there is no separate debug run as we had in ADF. We had run now, run with triggers, run with trigger run, and you had debug option there. So it did confuse a lot of customers as well. And so we have a single run button which will execute your pipeline, and you can use that for debug runs as well. the most important part here, which you wouldn't realize it during your free trials, but post the trials, when it starts to get billed, you would see the simplification in billing. And there's a lot of effort that has gone in terms of simplifying the billing so that any data engineer or business analyst who uses pipelines should be able to understand it. So there's no 3 different billing meters. In case of ADF and Synapse, we had a billing unit, a meter for orchestration, and that was based on number of count of executions. And then we had activities, external activities. It had a different billing value per hour run. And similarly, we had pipeline billing meter, and we have the copy billing meter, and we had the data flow billing meter, and we had 5 or 6 different kinds of billing meters to deal with to get to the pricing, and it became extremely difficult for customers at times to predict what the cost is going to be for executions, because they had so many different billing meters, and we have had calls with customers to explain them, and it took days to weeks to kind of grok how the billing works in Data Factory and Synapse pipelines. So that has been a key input from customers, and we made sure that we simplify these concepts in moving forward in Fabric data pipelines. And so in Fabric data pipelines, we have a single core hour concept, and different activities based on the duration will be billed accordingly based on that core hour concept. Yes, it's not going to be as simple. It's not going to be like a single value. There's going to be different value. For example, the data flow charges you versus a notebook run charges you, but everything will be consolidated as core hours. And so there'll be a value and there'll be a duration, and that's how all executions will be measured. So it's going to be much more easier as compared to Azure when it comes to the billing. So there's a lot of billing simplification that has gone in. The next point I want to cover is single sign-on connectivity to Fabric data stores and different artifacts. So in Fabric, when you're connecting to, let's say, a lakehouse or a data warehouse or Gusto database, all these connections, you don't have to create an external connections as you earlier had to do it in Azure world. So all these connections are implicitly mapped, and it's all mapped based on the user who is logged in. So it's very much single sign-on experience where based on what permissions and access controls that you have on different lakehouse and data warehouses, you would be able to access them and work with them. And so this kind of simplifies, of course, getting started, but more importantly, you can access data warehouses, lake houses, which are not only part of your pipeline, or it may be part of different workspaces as well. For now, we have only enabled this using the UI, which is within the same workspace, but very shortly we'll be adding these capabilities where you will be able to pick up all the lake houses which are across your workspaces as well. And that's thanks to single sign-on connectivity experiences, where we can easily light up those experiences where you have access to any lakehouse or warehouse or notebook which are across the same workspace from the workspace that you are building your pipelines in. You can very easily do that. The fourth item that I would want to talk about is user scope connections and the connection sharing. More importantly, of course, the connection sharing. So that has been a feature that has been asked by various customers in Data Factory and in Synapse, where, of course, due to the security reasons, you may not want to share a connection with all the other users in the same factory, because there may be different roles using within a different factory. So that factory maps to a workspace in Fabric, and hence the need remains the same, where you don't want a particular connection to be misused by any other user who shouldn't be accessing that particular SQL server, for example. And the right design for that, the improvement is that in case of Fabric, any connection that you create is created at the user scope level, and it's not tagged to a workspace. It's not tagged to any all the workspace, or by default to all the users in the workspace. It's always tagged to a user, and it's always scoped to that particular user, which is actually a very good security practice. And what happens is, in case if you want to share that credential or connection with other users, you can of course use security groups, you can use user groups where you can share it with groups, or you can share it with this individual user of Microsoft Fabric. So all those functionalities, just like how you would share connections with anyone within your organizations, are available here now. Of course, by default, it's not shared with anyone, and which is a very good security practice, which we missed in Data Factory in Azure and in Synapse on Azure. And so those things are taken care of now. So you can actually share with specific users. And this is extremely important, especially when you're using OAuth, credentials that, it's not suggested to share OAuth, but in case if you have to, because you have, let's say, a service OAuth account that you're using for connecting to or sending out emails, and you might want to share that service user account with another user or a group, and hence you can actually do that as well. The fifth interesting thing that I want to talk about is the set of new activities that we have added, and there are plenty more which are coming soon. Now, few of them are Office 365 Outlook. This is one of the key feedback we have heard from customers in ADF and in Azure Synapse is, how do I send an email in case if an event happens in a pipeline, or I want to send some output of a pipeline from the previous activity into my, as an email to the group so that people can react. And so those features have been missing, and we have been asking customers to kind of use Logic Apps on Azure to send emails out and things like that. Now, those things are not required anymore in Fabric. It's a SaaS world and SaaS pipelines, and so we have these native capabilities in here where you can send email using your Office 365 account, and you can send Teams notifications as well. And we are more than willing to hear from you all what all different actions or activities you would want to be present in pipelines, and we can light those up as well. For example, in case if you're looking for Gmail connections, or if you're looking for Outlook live ID emails, or so on, so you can let us know, and we'll be more than happy to light those up as well.
Here is an email that was sent out based on the activity execution, and you see all the parameters that were used in the content are actually returning the actual values during the execution. And this is how dynamic pipelines or the dynamic values from the executions can be sent out as emails.
So that was another pain point that we solved in Fabric pipelines, and an interesting one for you to use. The sixth one is multitasking across artifact during authoring. So I know that multi-tabs was available in ADF, and it was available in Synapse as well. But I'll tell you a few things which was painful, especially when you're dealing with notebooks, right? Or especially when you're dealing with any other like data warehouse scripts or Gusto, KQLs and so on. Now, every time in case of ADF, we didn't have this option of jumping and opening up those scripts or opening up the notebooks because these were basically two different services in Azure. In case of Fabric, it isn't the case, and Fabric has a capability of multitasking, a native multitasking, which means you don't have to create multiple browser tabs, but within the same browser tab, you can open up different artifacts or related artifacts across tabs, and you can keep switching across the tabs. So it's kind of a vertical tab, and you can actually switch across those tabs values as well and open different pipelines. It's a very handy feature, especially if you're dealing with, like, let's say from a notebook, from a pipeline, you're calling multiple notebooks and you want to switch across while you are editing, each one of them, like notebooks, and you want to switch back to the pipeline and try a debug run and so on. So those experiences are quite improved here with the multitasking capability in Fabric. The seventh capability, and one of the most important capabilities, of course, the last two here are very important and enterprise capabilities, which I want to talk about. Now, the seventh one is Monitoring Hub, which basically is a unified monitoring platform. It's centralized monitoring for data flows, data pipelines, not just those, but actually notebooks or any executions that are happening within Fabric ecosystem. You will be able to see those, and based on the access permissions you have, you'll be able to see those executions here. So there's plenty of details here and different kinds of artifacts. When I say artifact, I mean pipeline or data flow. These are all types of artifacts in Fabric, and so all the different executions, you can find all of them in a single place, which you can filter out if needed, and get more value out of it. So those are the benefits you get. It's truly a unified platform. So if you see in Azure Data Factory or in Synapse, it was always restricted to a single workspace, like for example, a single data factory or a single instance of Synapse workspace. And so at any point in time, if you had 2 or 3 different workspaces, let's say one for finance, one for sales, and one for marketing, you would have to switch across 3 workspaces in the monitoring to kind of see the different pipelines. And so if you were collaborating or calling different pipelines across the 3 workspaces or 3 different data factories, it was extremely difficult to monitor such pipelines, and you had to switch across different views in different resources. That's not the case now in Fabric, because you have a common unified monitoring hub, and in that monitoring hub you will see all the pipelines and the lineage and the history of those runs, which pipeline kicked off which pipeline, and so on. So all the details are in there in a single view. Now, moving on to the 8th and again a very important one is around lineage and sensitivity labels. So in case of Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics pipelines, we did support Purview integration, and of course that was not the default option, so you had to do an additional stuff to get the lineage information via Azure Purview, and that worked very well. Things which were missing were sensitivity labels, and even the lineage by default was missing. Now those things taken care of in the SaaS platform in Fabric, and by default, if you created a data source like Lakehouse or a data warehouse, and if you start consuming those data sources across different pipelines and data flows, and if you want to get to a single view of understanding how these data have been used or processed across which pipelines, what are the sensitivity labels on those. It's also known as the MIP label, and that's what kind of shows you the confidentiality labels or sensitivity labels across different artifacts. Like, are these something which are accessible by all employees, or only it's enterprise confidential, and so on. So in every organizations can have their own set of sensitivity labels that the administrator describes, and you will be able to choose any one of those labels and apply across your data artifacts, as well as processing artifacts like pipelines and notebooks and so on. Now it gives you a very good and in-depth understanding about your data, and based on the sensitivity, what all different artifacts are actually touching that particular data, so that you're well aware of the impact in case if there is any, and what are the different pipelines and data sources that gets impacted due to that particular change. So these were kind of my top 8 functionalities or interesting features that I think people coming especially from Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics pipelines world would love in Microsoft Fabric. And of course, which also means since I'm only covering those interesting topics, doesn't really mean that all the capabilities of Synapse Analytics and Data Factory are already there in Fabric. So this is going to be a work in progress, and we are on a daily basis, we are adding features, and so making sure that all the functionalities are supported in Fabric as well, just more in a more easier to understand fashion, rather than making it more complex. So simplification is one of the key guidelines here.
Now we're going to start with the data flows Gen 2 section, And we should probably start by talking more about what makes Dataflows Gen 2 so unique. Behind the scenes, it is a completely new architecture in comparison to Dataflows Gen 1 in Power BI, and also in comparison to Dataflows in Power Platform Dataflows. However, it is still the same Power Query experience that you know and love. We do have some unique experiences that are baked into Fabric Dataflows, like the AI infused experiences. We have the output destination feature. We have the ability to import and export Power Query templates, and we have a completely new and revamped refresh history experiences. So in the agenda, we have 5 new interesting capabilities that we have today in Fabric Dataflows Gen 2, or that will be coming soon. The first one is going to be the new Get Data experience. And this one I'm going to be showcasing really quick because it's still in development, but the ability to just get you as fast as possible to the data that you need to connect to, that's the goal of this new experience. We're also going to be talking about the new AI-infused dialogues and how you can leverage this AI to just have an accelerator into these experiences like the merge dialogue. We're also going to be talking about the output destination and how you can pick a destination for each of your queries and define how you want to load the data to that destination. With number 4, we're going to go with the Power Query templates, how you can export a template, how you can import a template. And lastly, we're going to go with the refresh history and what makes this experience so unique and so much better than the previous one. I want to show this slide right now because what I'm about to show you is going to be a demo that is based on a tutorial that we have, which we call the Data Factory or Data Integration in an Hour. So it's this tutorial link. If you want to follow along on what I'm about to showcase, it's going to be taken directly from the module 2 of this tutorial, so you can follow along. But yes, so we're going to go ahead and showcase all of those really new and interesting features in a demo. And you're going to see how amazing Dataflows truly is. Now inside of the Dataflows Gen 2 experience, the first thing that we want to do is connect to our data source. To do that, we're going to go to the Home tab in the ribbon and click on Get Data. What you're seeing right now is just a prototype, an early prototype that we're working on for the new and modern Get Data experience. For now, I'm just going to stick to looking for the connector that I'm going to be using, and it's the Lakehouse connector since my data is inside of a Lakehouse. The first screen is just going to tell me that I need to connect to the data source and enter the credentials. It already knows that I have a connection. I connected to this data source before, so I'm just going to click Next. And now it's going to take me to the Navigator screen. So it's going to list all of the workspaces that I have available. I have quite a few internally, but I'm going to go with the one that is called Dataflows 2 Demos. Inside of that one, I have one lakehouse that is called Sample. And inside of that sample database, I have that file from the tutorial and I have the table. So I have the table for New York City taxi data. And when I click on it and select it, it's going to try to show me a preview on the right of that data. So I have it right now. So let's go ahead and click on Create. And this is going to land that data or that query inside of my data flow or my Power Query editor. I'm going to resize the queries pane and I'm going to see now the diagram view. Underneath, I'm going to see this query script view, and underneath, I see the data preview. So if I want to change this, I can just click here on maximize the data preview. If I don't want to see the query script, I can change this right here. So it can actually just be the step. And I can also change this from this view tab. So I can change it from the diagram view so I don't have the diagram view enabled. And from the script, I can just say that I don't want this at the moment. So I can just focus on the data preview, and these bars that we see here, we can enable them from the data view right here. So enable column profile, column quality, and column distributions. Now we want to start with the transformations that I want to do on this data set. So let's go ahead and go to the LPEP pick up date time, and I want to change this to be a date. I want to make this change because later on I'm going to be merging the data with another table, and we have to use a date column. So that's the first thing. I'm going to make this a date column. The second one is that I really don't need all of the columns from this table. So I have multiple options in Power Query. I can either right-click the column and choose remove columns, or I can select multiple columns with control key, just holding the control key, and go into this one that says remove columns, or remove other columns. Or I can go with a different approach and just tell Power Query or Dataflow which ones do I want to pick, or which ones do I want to actually maintain. So in my case, I want to remove just a few. I'm just going to remove a few to give you an idea of how easy this is. So imagine that I'm just going to be doing this, and let's just remove this too as well. And I'm going to only keep the ones that have the check mark. And now I'm adding another step, and you notice that every time that I click anything or do any sort of transformation, it gets added to the apply step sections on the right. And this is where you can keep track of everything that you're doing. So if you want to look back at how things look before you did a step, you can just click that step and it will take you back to that specific point in time. I'm going to click on choose column. That is the step where I'm at. And I'm going to follow the instructions that I have in that tutorial. The next one is just doing another filter. And this is just to showcase how intuitive and how easy doing a filter really is here. All you have to do is go to the column. In this one, I'm just going to say that I want to select only the Y value. So in this case, it's adding a filter rows statement or step to only keep the values that have the Y. The next one is around just making sure that we have just the data that we need. This is actually the year 2015. I believe that it's all of 2015. You can always click here where it says load more. But the reality is that what we want to do is simply go into date filters. In between, I can say, for example, let's go here to the year 2015 with this date picker. Super nice. Just go into the 1st of January of that year, and then do the same thing for the end of the year. For the end of the month. There we go. So click OK, and that's going to add another step. It's not going to be the same filter rows. It's going to be a different one, so it's easier for you to reconfigure if you need to. So you can always just double click that step, and it will take you back to that dialog that you had where you define that logic. So the next one, what we want to do, and the reality is that we're done with this specific query. What we want to do now is get another data set, but this one is going to come from an endpoint. It's going to be from a web page, really. So I'm going to look for the web API connector, and I'm going to pass this URL that I have, which connects to a CSV file. So I'm going to connect to a CSV file. I could have used also the CSV connector. Both of them are valid. So I'm just going to do it this way. Create a connection to that URL. I already have a connection set. It's giving me a preview of the data. Right now it's just a CSV, but it doesn't recognize the column headers yet. Just going to click on create, and it's going to load that data into Power Query or Dataflow as a new query. So it's going to name it query. I'm just going to put this as discount because the data that I have here is really a discount for a specific vendor ID within a specific period of time. And that period of time is actually just a date. But it's in a shape that it's more of a matrix or more of a cross-tab report rather than something that I can really merge with the taxi data that I have. So the first thing that I need to do is use the first row as header, so promote the headers. So that's the first step. The second step is to unpivot the columns. So I have columns that represent every single date, and the rows represent values. So I can just right-click where it says vendor ID and click where it says unpivot other columns. So with that one, what's going to happen now is that we're going to have the data in a shape that is easier to merge between those two tables because we have the vendor ID, we have this column that is called attribute that I'm going to rename to be date, and the value, I'm just going to rename it to be discount because this is actually a discount. So I'm going to change this to be a date because it has to be a date so I can merge it with the other column. And this discount, I can go into the transform column, go into the standard, and let's say that I want to divide this by 100. And the reason why I want to do this is because the discount has to be a value from 0 to 1. It cannot be bigger than 1 because we want to do it that way. So at this point, we basically have the two data sets or the two tables. I can go into the diagram view to see how it looks like. And they basically look like just two queries. And what I want to do is use the NYC taxi query as my left table and merge it with the discount table. To make that happen, I go into the home tab. I'm going to go into the combine group, go into merge queries, and go with merge queries as new. This is going to give me this new dialog. And what I have to do is that it's already selected the left table, which is NYC taxi. And I'm going to go with the discount table now. And notice that this little light bulb, this is something new. And this is one of the AI infused experiences that we have. It's going to try to help me to map the columns between those two tables. At the moment, it's telling me that the first suggestion is telling me that it can map or basically pair the columns from LPEP pickup date time to the date from the discount and the vendor ID to the vendor ID that we have in the other column on the other table. So I'm going to select that one and it automatically just matches those two columns in the correct order. So we can see the number one to the right, 2, 2. So it did that for me. It helped me. I didn't have to think too much about what are the columns. And the next thing that I can do is just click on OK. This is going to create a new query. And I have to enable this because I'm trying to merge data between two different data sources. So I'm just going to accept this warning because I know about my data sources and where that data is coming from and how it's being combined. And once this happens, it's going to allow me to see the table from the left, which was NYC taxi, and a new column all the way to the right for the data from the discount table. If I click on the white space right next to the table values, I'm going to get this details pane that is going to allow me to see what's inside of this table value, which is just one row. The corresponding value for what is the discount for that particular vendor in that particular date. So that's what we're trying to do, is just trying to see all of the taxi data. So it's basically fees and what's going to be the discount to that fee. So I'm just going to click here where it says, where we have the two arrows that go in opposite direction. And I'm going to simply allow to expand the discount column. There we go. So now what we have defined is effectively two queries. They both have multiple steps of transformations, and then we merge those two into a single query where we have all of the data combined into a single table or view. What I want to do now is load that data to my destination. So I'm going to click here. I can actually click in multiple places. This is the query that has the data that I want to sync or that I want to load to the destination. So I can click in here in Add Data Destination, in the ribbon where it says Add Data Destination, or even in the query settings, there is this plus button where I can click it and load it to the destination. So I'm going to say Lake House. I want to load this data to the same lake house that I have already created. So it's going to be a similar experience to the one that we had when we connected to the data source. So in this case, for example, it's just going to be data flows 2 demos. That's the name of the workspace. Inside of that workspace, we're going to find the same lake house that I already created. So this is the sample lake house. And now it's all about creating that new table. So I'm just going to name this new table just output. So it's super easy to find out. And now we go into the choose destination settings in the next page. how do we want to update the data? Should we try to append the data to an existing table? And every time that we refresh this data flow, it tries to just append the data to that table? Or do we want to clear that table and then just replace everything that was in it? In this case, we're going to go with simply replace. And it already mapped all of the columns, so I don't have to do anything. I just have to click on Save Settings. We're not yet loading the data into the destination. What we have created is effectively the logic in order to evaluate this data flow and make the execution happen. So now what I'm going to do is simply click where it says Publish. And this is going to publish my data flow to my workspace. It's going to do it as data flow 1. It's going to do some validation. And while that happens, we can actually try to open another window. So I'm just going to try and open another window so we can see the lake house, which is called sample. There we go. And we notice that at the moment, we only have the NYC taxi data as the only table in here. So we can go back to the workspace. This is the workspace. Still doing the validation. And now what we can do is just wait for the refresh to happen. It's actually happening at the moment. We can go into the refresh history to see what's actually happening. And this is a more interactive experience now. So we see that it's happening. Previously, you could only just download the CSV file so you can understand what was happening. But now you can actually click on this start time. And it's going to tell you what is the status, what was the type of refresh, the start time, the end time, what is the duration, the session ID, request ID, data flow IDs. And once this finishes, it's going to be able to tell you for each specific query which one succeeded. And if any of them had any failures, we are going to be able to go deeper into those failures and figure out what was the error message for each of them. So that's a really new experience, super rich experience that we have with data flows Gen 2 and the refresh history. For now, it's just still loading. This process usually takes around 4 minutes, I believe. So I'm going to pause the video and come back when this is over so we can go over the specifics of the refresh history. So the data flow has finished refreshing, and now we can see that the status shows as succeeded. I can go again, drill down into this one and see all of the tables or queries that were set to be loaded. And we can also drill down into the activities. This activity is telling me that there was a write operation, and it's telling me that there was an endpoint, which is the lake house. I'm writing data to the lake house, and this is the volume process, total bytes. Again, notice that some of the things that we're showcasing at the moment might not be in production, but we're still working on it, and you should be able to see them later this year. So this is the experience, the new refresh history experience that we're seeing and that you're going to be seeing in Fabric. One thing that we haven't seen yet is the data inside of the lakehouse. So now that the data has been loaded, we can go into the lakehouse and we see this new output table that was loaded from data flow. And we can see this new discount column, which is the one that we were looking for. So really nice. We are able to now load data or sync data with data flows. One super neat thing that we have also with data flows is that you're able to go into the data flow and you can actually export this whole definition of your Power Query. So it's gonna export all of your queries and all of the metadata for those queries. When we call metadata, it will be like the description of the queries, the groups of the queries. Those are metadata, as well as the locale of the project that you're doing or you're using. But here you can click where it says export template, and it's gonna export the data flow. So you can click on export, name this, let's say demo, and just click on OK. That is gonna download a PQT file or a Power Query template file. And what you can do to import this is that you can create a new data flow. So I'm just gonna close this, open a new data flow Gen 2, And in this welcome message or this welcome canvas, at the moment, you're going to be able to see the import from a Power Query template as a link down below. We can just find that one, demo.pqt, and it's going to import everything around that pqt file. So at the moment, we do have a bug with this one where the information from the output destination is being saved with the Power Query template. This will be changed so that there's going to be a setting where you can define if you want to export that definition or if you prefer not to, and have this template be available in other integrations of Power Query. So you can import it into, let's say, Power Platform data flows. As today, the main way that you can import a template in Power Platform data flows is through the export of a template in Excel for Windows. So you create a template with the Power Query in Excel for Windows, but the goal is that we can have this experience of exporting and importing templates pretty much everywhere Power Query is going to be where it's at. So that's the goal, and we're working on making this a better experience. On behalf of the Data Factory team, we would like to thank you for your time and for giving us this opportunity to showcase what we have. If you're inclined, we would love to see you in our community. We have a vibrant Data Factory community forum where you can ask questions and just interact with the rest of the community. If you have any issues, we welcome you to check out the known issues page that we have, or get in touch with the support team so you can get more feedback and more support directly from the engineers. We do have this tutorial. We just went through the module number 2, but we still have module 1 and number 3 in that tutorial. So if you want to give it a try and do it on your own, that's a really nice tutorial that we have. If you have any feedback, you can actually provide it right in there. And don't forget to use the hashtags on your socials. The hashtag is Data Factory. Thank you.